The ivory wedding invitation sat on my coffee table for 3 weeks, its gold-embossed edges catching the afternoon light. My son Daniel, my only child, was getting married in just 2 months, yet when I called to share my excitement, his future, bride Vanessa answered with a hesitation that turned my blood cold. Eleanor, we've decided to keep the wedding party photos streamlined. Family portraits will just be immediate family. You know, Daniel, me, and my parents. I remember how the phone trembled in my hand as I realized what she was saying. After raising my son alone for 27 years, I was being edited out of his wedding memories before they'd even been created. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I live in the small coastal town of Willowbrook, in the same pale blue cottage I purchased after Harold, my husband, passed away when Daniel was just 5 years old. The hydrangea bushes outside my kitchen window are nearly as old as Daniel himself. I planted them the summer after Harold's funeral, when the silence in our apartment became too much to bear. These flowers have witnessed 2 decades of birthday celebrations, science project disasters, and tearful college goodbyes, the entire journey of raising a child on my own. The morning after that phone call with Vanessa, I shuffled to my garden bench and sat among the hydrangeas, their blue heads nodding sympathetically in the breeze. My neighbor Marietta spotted me from her porch and walked over, coffee mug in hand. At 72, Marietta moves with the determined stride of someone who's survived enough disappointments to know they won't be the end of her. "You look like you've lost your last friend," she said, settling beside me. "What's happened?" I explained about the wedding, about Vanessa's polite but firm exclusion, about how Daniel hadn't even been the one to tell me. "Did you ask Daniel about it directly?" Marietta's directness is why I've loved her for 15 years of neighborly friendship. He texted later saying it was just easier this way, and that Vanessa's family is particular about appearances. The words still stung as I repeated them. Apparently, her father is some kind of banking executive in Northbrook, and the whole family is very polished. What I didn't say, what I couldn't bring myself to voice, was how Daniel had been slowly disappearing from my life since meeting Vanessa Harrington 18 months ago. The Sunday dinners became monthly, then quarterly. My homemade Christmas ornaments stayed in their box last December. The subtle corrections when I spoke, "It's specifically, Mom, not pacifically," accumulated like paper cuts on my heart. Marietta placed her weathered hand over mine. "Eleanor Barnes, you wiped that boy's tears and bottom. You worked too. Jobs to put him through that fancy university. And now he's ashamed because your hands show honest work and your house isn't in some gated community?" I couldn't answer. The truth caught in my throat like a fishbone. In my bedroom that evening, I opened the cedar chest where I keep the pieces of my past that matter most. Harold's Navy service medal, Daniel's construction paper Mother's Day cards, the newspaper, clipping when Daniel won the state science fair in 10th grade, local single mother's son earns full scholarship to Palmer University. I'd been so proud that day my cheeks hurt from smiling. At the bottom of the chest lay a velvet pouch containing the pearl necklace Harold had given me on our 5th anniversary, just 6 months before the accident. I'd saved it all these years, planning to wear it at Daniel's wedding. Now I wondered if I'd even be seated at a table where anyone would notice. The wedding was to be held at Rosewood Estate, a sprawling historical mansion in Northbrook where the Harrington family had connections. When the formal invitation finally arrived, I noticed my name was listed simply as Ms. Eleanor Barnes on the envelope. No mother of the groom designation. Inside, the reception card indicated I'd been assigned to table 19, far from the wedding party. I recognized none of the other names at my table. "You should tell him how you feel," urged my sister Pauline during our weekly phone call. Living 3 states away in Meadowvale, Pauline had always been my emotional backbone, even if she couldn't be here physically as often as we both wished. And say what? Please don't be embarrassed by your simple mother? My laugh sounded hollow even to my own ears. He's building a new life. I don't want to be the one who makes it harder. That boy needs to remember where he came from, Pauline said firmly. Being accepted by fancy people doesn't mean rejecting the ones who loved you first. The weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of anxiety dreams and practiced smiles. I bought a slate blue dress, modest, elegant, nothing that would embarrass Daniel, from a boutique in the neighboring town of Larkfield. The saleswoman, Judith, helped me find low heels I could actually walk in and spent an hour teaching me how to apply makeup that she promised would make me look naturally enhanced. I never mentioned it was for my son's wedding where I'd been, designated as practically a stranger. 2 days before the ceremony, Daniel called. His voice had that artificial brightness I'd come to recognize as his handling mom tone. Just checking you've got the details straight, Mom. The ceremony starts at 4, but guests should arrive by 3:30. And remember, the family photos. We'll be right after the ceremony with just the wedding party and Vanessa's parents. I remember, Daniel. I kept my voice even. I'll be at table 19 for the reception. A pause. Right, that's with some of Vanessa's father's colleagues. They're very nice. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the hydrangeas through the window. They were fading now, their blue petals tinged with the lavender of late summer. I thought about all the milestones I'd faced alone after Harold died. Daniel's first day of school, teaching him to drive, moving him into his dorm room. I'd never expected to attend my only child's wedding alone, too, relegated to the background like an awkward acquaintance. That night, I made a decision. I reached for my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart but hadn't called in years. When the gruff voice answered, my heart raced with both anxiety and a strange, defiant hope. Jack? It's Eleanor Barnes. I need to ask you for something important. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The invitation to Daniel's wedding felt like both a gift and a wound. I wanted desperately to be part of his special day, yet the conditions attached to my participation left me feeling hollow. The morning after my call, with Jack, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the early light filter through the lace curtains Harold and I had chosen together decades ago. The house felt especially quiet, as if holding its breath. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Just confirming you received the seating arrangement. Also, the mother of the groom traditionally wears cream or champagne tones. Your blue dress might clash with our color palette. I set the phone down without responding. In my 30 years working as a pediatric nurse at Willowbrook Community Hospital, I'd developed a talent for maintaining composure when things fell apart. Before retirement, I'd held the hands of frightened children during procedures, comforted parents receiving difficult news, and stayed steady during emergencies when everyone else was panicking. Now, I needed that professional calm for myself. The blue dress hung on my bedroom door, a quiet rebellion. I touched its silky fabric, remembering how the saleswoman Judith had smiled and said, "This brings out the silver in your hair beautifully, Eleanor." In that moment at the boutique, I had felt elegant and worthy of being seen, feelings that were rapidly evaporating under Vanessa's scrutiny. The telephone rang, startling me from my thoughts. It was Marietta, her voice more animated than usual. I just ran into Greta Mills at the pharmacy, she said without preamble. Did you know she used to work as a housekeeper for the Harringtons before she moved to Willowbrook? My interest piqued. No, I had no idea. Well, according to Greta, Vanessa's mother, Corinne, is quite the social climber. Apparently, when Corinne married Philip Harrington, her own parents weren't even invited to the wedding because they were too common. Greta heard it directly from the family's former chauffeur. I sighed, rubbing my temple. That explains some things, but it doesn't make me feel much better. There's more, Marietta continued. Greta says Corinne didn't speak to her own sister for years because she married a plumber instead of a professional. Only reconciled when the sister's husband sold his business for millions. The pattern was becoming clear. I wasn't being excluded because I was Eleanor Barnes. I was being excluded because I represented a working-class history that didn't fit the Harrington narrative. The realization stung, but somehow knowing the exclusion wasn't personal made it marginally easier to bear. Has Daniel always been embarrassed? By me? I whispered, voicing the fear that had been growing since the engagement. Absolutely not, Marietta replied firmly. That boy used to bring his college friends home for your pot roast. Remember how proud he was showing them your nursing awards? This isn't him, Eleanor, it's influence. After hanging up, I walked to the small home office that had once been Daniel's bedroom. The walls still held shadows of the solar system decals we'd put up when he was 10. In the filing cabinet, I found the folder labeled Daniel, Important. Documents. Inside were his birth certificate, school records, the scholarship letters, and a stack of cards he'd given me over the years. I pulled out the most recent one, from Mother's Day 2 years ago, before Vanessa. The handwritten message inside read, "To the strongest woman I know, everything I am is because of you. Love always, Daniel." Had he meant those words then? Did he remember writing them now? I was interrupted by another text notification. This? Time from Daniel. Mom, Vanessa's parents are hosting a rehearsal dinner at Norwood Country Club tomorrow night. I meant to tell you earlier, but things have been crazy. It's just wedding party and immediate family. See you at the ceremony Saturday. Another exclusion. Not even an apology or acknowledgement that I, his only living parent, might have expected to be included in the rehearsal dinner. I responded with a simple, "I understand. Good luck tomorrow." Then I turned off my phone and did something I rarely allowed myself. I cried. Not delicate tears, but deep heaving sobs that came from a place of accumulated hurt. I cried for the little boy who once couldn't fall asleep, unless I was holding his hand. I cried for the teenager who'd proudly introduced me to his first girlfriend. I cried for the young man who'd hugged me fiercely at his college graduation and whispered, "We did it, Mom." And I cried for myself, for the mother who had poured everything into her son only to be deemed insufficient when measured against wealthier, more polished standards. When the tears finally subsided, I washed my face and studied my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My eyes were puffy, but there was something different in them, a glint of determination that hadn't been there before. I was not going to shuffle into that wedding with my head down, grateful for whatever scraps of inclusion they deigned to throw my way. I picked up the phone and called Pauline again. "I've made a decision," I told her, my voice steadier than it had been in weeks. "I'm not going to pretend this doesn't hurt, but I'm also not going to let them make me feel small." "That's my sister," Pauline said. "What are you going to do?" "I've asked Jack to accompany me." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Jack Emerson? Daniel's godfather? The man who— Yes, I interrupted. That Jack. Jack Emerson had been Harold's best friend since their Navy days. After Harold's death, Jack had stepped in to help with Daniel, teaching him to fish, attending his baseball games, building the treehouse in our backyard that became Daniel's summer sanctuary. But when Daniel was 15, Jack and I had a falling out. A misunderstanding that escalated into hurt feelings and stubborn pride on both sides. Jack moved to Cedar Ridge, just an hour away, and our contact dwindled to Christmas cards and occasional updates through mutual friends. "Does Daniel know you've invited him?" Pauline asked cautiously. "No, and I'm not going to tell him." Jack was Harold's best friend. He should have been part of Daniel's life all these years. Maybe it's time to correct that mistake. After we hung up, I felt lighter somehow, as if making this one decision had shifted something fundamental. I was no longer just reacting to exclusions. I was actively choosing my response. That evening, I pulled out the pearl necklace from its velvet pouch. The creamy orbs caught the lamplight, each one perfectly imperfect. Harold had saved for months to buy it, bringing it home with such pride. "For the most beautiful woman in Willowbrook," he'd said, fastening it around my neck with fingers still calloused from construction work. I tried it on now, the cool pearls settling against my skin, like old friends. They would look stunning with the blue dress, regardless of Vanessa's preferred color palette. As night fell, I sat on my porch swing, listening to the evening symphony of crickets and distant traffic. The autumn air carried a hint of wood smoke from someone's fireplace. I thought about Jack, wondering if he was nervous about our reunion after all these years. Wondering if he remembered the last words we'd exchanged. Angry, hurtful things neither of us truly meant. My phone lit up with a message notification. I'd turned it back on, half expecting more instructions or criticisms from Vanessa. Instead, it was from Jack. "Confirmed. We'll pick you up at 2:30 Saturday. Bought a new tie and everything." A small smile formed on my lips. Some bridges, it seemed, were never completely burned, just waiting for someone brave enough to take the first step back across. The morning of Daniel's wedding arrived with a perfect blue sky, as if the universe itself had received Vanessa's color palette instructions. I woke early, my night having been punctuated by anxious dreams, where I arrived at the ceremony only to find my chair had been removed, my invitation revoked. In one particularly vivid moment, I dreamed I was completely transparent, standing in the church while guests walked through me as if I weren't there at all. I showered and sat at my vanity table in my robe, attempting to recreate the makeup techniques Judith had shown me. My hands trembled slightly as I applied foundation, concealer, and the subtle eyeshadow that was supposed to enhance without overwhelming. The woman in the mirror looked both familiar and foreign. My features, arranged to appear more acceptable for the occasion, but still undeniably me. At 10 o'clock, my doorbell rang. For a disorienting moment, I wondered if Jack had arrived hours early. But when I opened the door, I found Marietta holding a bakery box and a travel cup of coffee. "I figured you could use some reinforcements," she said, bustling past me into the kitchen. "Cranberry orange scones from Harlow's, still warm." She set down her offerings and turned to look at me properly, her eyes softening. "Oh, Eleanor, you look lovely already." "I'm not even dressed yet," I protested, self-consciously touching my hair, which I'd set in foam rollers. "Doesn't matter. There's a light in your eyes today. Determination looks good on you." We sat at the kitchen table, the familiar ritual of sharing coffee and pastries calming my nerves. I told Marietta about my decision to bring Jack, watching her expression shift from surprise to approval. "Jack Emerson," she mused. "I remember him from the block parties years ago. Tall fellow with the laugh you could hear 3 streets over. Always brought those deviled eggs with the paprika." "That's him," I confirmed, smiling at the memory. "Daniel used to call him Uncle Thunder because of that laugh." "Does Daniel know he's coming?" I shook my head. "I'm listed as Ms. Eleanor Barnes plus guest on the invitation. I'm simply bringing my guest." Marietta's eyes twinkled. "Well, Ms. Barnes, I believe you're about to make this wedding considerably more interesting than the Harringtons had planned." After she left, I began the careful process of getting ready. The blue dress slipped over my head in a whisper of fabric, settling perfectly around my curves. It wasn't ostentatious or youthful, but it was elegant. A dress that acknowledged my 63 years while refusing to apologize for them. The pearl necklace completed the ensemble, its soft luster warming against my skin. I was fastening my mother's silver bracelet around my wrist when I heard a car door slam outside. My heart quickened as I moved to the window. There in my driveway stood Jack Emerson, smoothing down his tie and adjusting his suit jacket before approaching my front door. The years had been kind to Jack. At 67, his once dark hair was now silver, but still thick and combed neatly back from his forehead. He'd maintained his military posture, shoulders squared, back straight, though the slight paunch around his middle suggested he still enjoyed good food and cold beer. When he spotted me at the window, his face broke into that wide, generous smile I'd almost forgotten. I opened the door before he could ring the bell. "Eleanor," he said, his voice reverent. "You look absolutely stunning." For a moment, we just stood there, taking each other in. The awkwardness I'd feared didn't materialize. Instead, there was a quiet recognition, as if the intervening years had been compressed into nothing. "It's good to see you, Jack," I said finally, meaning it completely. He stepped into the hallway, bringing with him the scent of sandalwood cologne and something indefinably Jack, a combination of fresh laundry and autumn air that immediately triggered a cascade of memories: backyard barbecues, fishing trips with Daniel, evenings on this very porch discussing everything and nothing while Harold worked night shifts. "I brought you something," he said, producing a small wrist corsage from behind his back. White roses with sprigs of blue delphinium, wrapped with a silver ribbon. "I wasn't sure about wedding protocol these days, but I remember you always loved flowers." The thoughtfulness of the gesture nearly undid me. When was the last time someone had considered what I might love, had anticipated my preferences without being asked? "It's perfect," I said, extending my wrist so he could slip it on. His fingers were gentle, careful not to crush the delicate blooms. "Hydrangeas are actually my favorite now, but these roses are beautiful." "Hydrangeas," he repeated, nodding seriously. "I'll remember that for next time." Next time. The casual implication that there would be future occasions hung between us, unexplored but promising. We settled in the living room to wait until it was time to leave for the ceremony. Jack glanced around, noting the changes since. He'd last been there. The new sofa, the different paint color, the collection of travel photographs from the trips I'd taken after retirement. "You went to the Grand Canyon," he observed, studying one of the framed pictures. "Harold always wanted to see it." "I scattered some of his ashes there," I admitted. "Kept it between me and Daniel. It wasn't exactly legal." Jack's booming laugh filled the room, so familiar it made my chest ache. Harold would have loved that, breaking rules even after he was gone. We fell into conversation easily, catching up on 15 years of separate lives. Jack had retired from the fire department 5 years ago, had briefly tried dating, a disaster at my age, and now spent most of his time volunteering with a veterans organization and restoring vintage motorcycles. He asked about my nursing career, my retirement, my garden. Never once did he mention the argument that had separated us, though its ghost occasionally flickered at the edges of our interaction. At 2:00, I excused myself for final preparations. In the bathroom, I loosened my hair from the rollers, letting it fall in soft waves around my face. The woman in the mirror looked calm, dignified. I added a touch more lipstick, blush sunrise, according to the label, and straightened my pearls. When I emerged, Jack was standing by the mantel, looking at the photographs displayed there. His finger rested on one in particular, Daniel. At about 10, balanced on Jack's shoulders at the Willowbrook Summer Festival, both of them beaming at the camera. "He was a great kid," Jack said softly. "Smart as a whip, but kind too. That's a rare combination." "He's still in there somewhere," I replied, wanting to believe it. "Under all those Harrington expectations." Jack turned to face me, his expression serious. "Eleanor, before we go, I need to say something. That fight, our falling out, I was wrong. Too proud to admit it then, but I've regretted it every day since." I shook my head. "We were both wrong, both too stubborn." "Maybe," he conceded. "But I promised Harold I'd look out for you and Daniel. Breaking that promise, it's the biggest regret of my life." There was nothing to say that wouldn't trivialize the moment, so I simply reached for his hand and squeezed it. His palm was warm and calloused against mine, working hands like Harold's had been, like mine were after decades of nursing. "We should go," I said after a moment. "I don't want to be late." The drive to Rosewood Estate took 40 minutes, passing from the modest homes of Willowbrook to the increasingly opulent neighborhoods of Northbrook. Jack whistled softly as we turned through the wrought iron gates and proceeded up the tree-lined driveway to the main house. "Daniel's marrying into some serious money," he observed. "The Harringtons are very established," I said diplomatically. The parking attendants directed Jack to a spot in the general guest area, far from the reserved section where the wedding party and VIP guests would park. As we walked toward the garden where the ceremony would be held, I felt the first flutter of real anxiety. What if Daniel was angry about Jack's presence? What if Vanessa or her parents made a scene? Jack must have sensed my unease because he gently placed his hand at the small of my back, not guiding or controlling, just a steady, reassuring presence. "Remember," he said quietly, "you have every right to be here, and I've got your back." With those words echoing in my mind, I straightened my shoulders and stepped forward, ready to face whatever the ceremony might bring. Rosewood Estate sprawled before us in all its historical grandeur, a 3-story colonial mansion with white columns and immaculate gardens that looked like they required an army of groundskeepers. Guests in designer attire streamed toward the ceremony space, a manicured lawn area bordered by ancient oak trees draped with twinkling lights and gauzy white fabric. String quartet music drifted through the air, mingling with the perfumed scent of hundreds of white roses arranged in elaborate displays. As we approached the guest book table, I spotted a familiar face, Sandra, Daniel's college roommate's mother, whom I'd met several times at campus events. She was helping direct guests, wearing the kind of expensive casual outfit that suggested she'd been included in the inner circle of wedding preparations. "Eleanor!" she exclaimed, embracing me with what felt like genuine warmth. "It's been ages. You look wonderful." "Thank you, Sandra. This is my friend Jack Emerson," I said, placing subtle emphasis on friend to discourage assumptions. "Jack, this is Sandra Mitchell. Her son Ryan roomed with Daniel at Palmer." Sandra's eyes widened slightly as she took in Jack, his imposing height, his well-worn but dignified suit, the protective way he stood beside me. "Lovely to meet you," she said, recovering quickly. "Eleanor, I heard you're seated at table 19. That's actually right next to ours. We'll catch up during the reception." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Fair warning, Vanessa's mother has been particular about every detail. The wedding coordinator looks ready to quit, and the florist was in tears earlier." A young woman in a headset approached, clipboard in hand. "Excuse me, are you Eleanor Barnes, the mother of the groom?" I nodded, feeling Jack shift slightly closer to me. "Perfect. I'm Zoe, the assistant coordinator. I've been asked to show you to your seat." She glanced at her clipboard. "I don't have a note about your +1, but we can accommodate, of course. My invitation specified plus guest," I replied calmly. "This is Jack Emerson, a very old family friend." Zoe smiled professionally. "Of course. Follow me, please." As we made our way through the gathering crowd, I caught glimpses of familiar faces, colleagues from Daniel's workplace, distant relatives I hadn't seen in years, a few neighbors from his and Vanessa's upscale apartment complex. Many nodded politely, but few approached. I wondered how I'd been described to them. Had Daniel mentioned his mother at all? Or was I simply a biographical footnote in his life story? Zoe led us to a row near the middle of the guest seating. Not the front where family would typically sit, but not hidden in the back either. A small mercy. As we settled into our chairs, I scanned the area, looking for Daniel. Instead, I spotted Vanessa's parents standing near the floral arch where the ceremony would take place. Philip Harrington cut an imposing figure in his tailored tuxedo, silver hair perfectly styled, his posture radiating the confidence of old money and social power. Beside him, Corinne Harrington wore a champagne-colored gown that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Her blonde hair swept into an elegant updo adorned with what appeared to be actual diamonds. They were speaking with the photographer, gesturing emphatically as if giving specific instructions. "Those are the in-laws, I take it," Jack whispered. "The Harringtons," I confirmed. "Philip and Corinne. They look exactly like I imagined," he said, with just enough dry humor to make me suppress a smile. More guests arrived, filling the rows of white chairs. The quartet transitioned to more formal processional music. I kept expecting to see Daniel, to catch his eye, to receive some acknowledgement from my son on his wedding day. My pulse quickened when I finally spotted him emerging from the side entrance of the mansion, walking briskly toward the ceremony space. But he disappeared into a small tent set up as a waiting area for the wedding party without looking in our direction. "He seems nervous," Jack observed. "Typical groom jitters." I wanted to believe that was all it was. Just pre-wedding anxiety, not deliberate avoidance. Another staff member approached, this one older and more authoritative. Clearly, the head wedding coordinator. She bent down to speak quietly but urgently. "Ms. Barnes, I'm Claire Donovan, the event director. There seems to be some confusion. The mother of the groom is traditionally seated in the front row. Would you and your guest please come with me?" Confused but hopeful, I gathered my purse and followed her, Jack close behind. Rather than leading us to the front row, however, she guided us to a small side area away from the other guests. "I apologize for the confusion," she said, her professional demeanor slipping to reveal genuine discomfort. "Mrs. Harrington has just informed me that there's been a change to the seating arrangement. The front row will now be reserved for the bride's parents only, with the groom's family in the second row." She paused, seemingly searching for the right words. "Given the adjusted arrangements, would you prefer to remain in your original seats?" The implication was clear. Corinne Harrington had intervened to ensure I wouldn't be seated alongside them, relegating me to the second row despite tradition. Being moved from middle seating to second row might seem like an upgrade, but the circumstances made it feel like another calculated slight. Jack's expression darkened. "That's not how wedding etiquette works. The mother of the groom—" I placed a gentle hand on his arm. "It's fine, Jack. Their wedding, their rules." Claire looked relieved. "Your original seats are perfectly fine, then? They actually have a very good view of the ceremony." "Our original seats will be lovely, thank you," I confirmed, maintaining my dignity despite the knot forming in my stomach. As we returned to our places, I felt eyes on us. Curious glances from guests who had witnessed the exchange, sympathetic looks from those who understood what had happened. Jack's jaw was tight, his normally jovial expression replaced by something harder. "Eleanor," he began, voice low with controlled anger. "Not now," I whispered. "Please." He subsided, but the protective energy radiating from him was almost tangible. His hand found mine, a gesture so natural it startled me, fingers interlacing, as if they'd been doing so for years. The simple human connection steadied me, anchoring me in the moment rather than allowing me to drift away on waves of hurt and humiliation. The ceremony began with the traditional processional. Groomsmen and bridesmaids paired off, walking down the aisle in measured steps. I recognized some of Daniel's friends among them, but others were strangers, likely Vanessa's friends or cousins. Ryan, Daniel's college roommate, caught my eye, as he passed and gave a small nod of acknowledgement. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The string quartet shifted to the bridal march, and the guests rose as Vanessa appeared at the end of the aisle on her father's arm. Her dress was a marvel of design, architectural in its precision, with a cathedral-length train carried by twin flower girls. She looked undeniably beautiful, though her smile seemed practiced rather than joyful. As she processed past our row, her eyes briefly met mine. There was no warmth in that glance, no acknowledgement of our future connection. Just a quick assessment. Before her gaze moved on, Philip Harrington didn't look at me at all. At the altar, the ceremony began. Daniel looked handsome in his tuxedo, if somewhat stiff. When he turned to watch Vanessa approach, I searched his face for the kind of incandescent happiness I'd always imagined my son would display on his wedding day. Instead, I saw something closer to relief, as if completing a challenging task, rather than beginning a joyous journey. The minister spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together. I tried to focus on the words, but found my mind wandering to Daniel's childhood, the little boy who'd cried when his pet goldfish died, who'd spent hours constructing elaborate Lego cities, who'd climbed into my bed during thunderstorms well, into his teens, though he'd made me promise never to tell his friends. How would that sensitive, loving child become this man who could allow his mother to be treated as an inconvenient afterthought on his wedding day? "You okay?" Jack whispered, his thumb gently stroking the back of my hand. I nodded, though the lump in my throat made it difficult to speak. The truth was, I wasn't okay. I was mourning, not just my exclusion from the wedding photos or the front row, but the gradual loss of my place in my son's life. The slow, steady erosion of our relationship that had brought us to this point where I sat among acquaintances rather than family, watching my only child marry into a world that had no room for me. The ceremony continued. Vows were exchanged, traditional, ones with no personal additions. Rings were presented on a silk pillow carried by Vanessa's young nephew. The minister pronounced them husband and wife. Daniel kissed his bride with appropriate restraint, and the string quartet launched into the recessional music as the newlyweds made their way back down the aisle. As they passed our row, I held my breath, hoping for a glance, a smile, any acknowledgement from my son. Daniel's eyes slid over the crowd, not focusing on any particular face, certainly not mine. The wedding party followed, then Vanessa's parents, walking with regal confidence. Only then did the guests begin to disperse, directed by staff toward the cocktail hour area on the mansion's east terrace, while the ceremony space was transformed for the reception. Jack stood, offering his hand to help me up. "Ready for the next phase of this production?" he asked, keeping his tone light despite the concern in his eyes. I smoothed my dress and straightened my shoulders, as ready as I'll ever be. As we joined the flow of guests moving toward the terrace, I steeled myself for what was to come. Cocktail hour mingling, dinner at table 19 with strangers, watching Daniel and Vanessa's first dance from a distance. I would maintain my dignity through it all, I decided. I would not let them see me falter. The cocktail hour at Rosewood Estate was in full swing by the time Jack and I made our way to the East Terrace. Staff in crisp black uniforms circulated with trays of champagne and elaborate hors d'oeuvres while guests clustered in small groups, their conversation creating a steady hum beneath the jazz quartet playing in the corner. Crystal chandeliers had been hung from the pergola overhead, casting a warm glow as the late afternoon sun began its descent. "Drink?" Jack asked, deftly snagging 2 champagne flutes from a passing server. I accepted gratefully, taking a small sip. The champagne was excellent, dry and crisp with delicate bubbles. I wondered briefly how much the Harringtons had spent on alcohol alone for this event. "There's Sandra," I said, spotting our earlier acquaintance near one of the high cocktail tables. "Should we join her? I'm not sure I'm ready to navigate this crowd alone." Jack nodded, placing his hand lightly at the small of my back as we made our way through the well-dressed guests. The gesture felt both protective and reassuring, like having an ally in unfamiliar territory. Sandra brightened when she saw us approaching. "Eleanor, I saved you a spot. These tables are at a premium." She was standing with 2 other women and a man, all approximately our age. Everyone, this is Eleanor Barnes, Daniel's mother, and her friend Jack Emerson. There was a moment, brief, but unmistakable, when recognition flickered across their faces. Not recognition of me personally, but understanding of who I was in the context of this wedding. The mother who had been deliberately excluded from the front row. The parent deemed unsuitable for the formal photographs. To their credit, they recovered. Quickly. Introductions were made. James and Patricia Wilson, friends of the Harringtons from the country club. Elizabeth Chen, whose daughter had attended the same private school as Vanessa. Their smiles were polite, their handshakes firm, but I could feel their curiosity like a tangible thing. Daniel looked so handsome up there, Patricia offered. You must be very proud. I am, I replied simply. He's always been a remarkable young man. I understand he works at Meridian Partners now, James said. Impressive firm. Philip must have put in a good word. Daniel earned that position entirely on his own merits, Jack interjected smoothly. He graduated top of his class, at Palmer, and had multiple offers. Meridian was lucky to get him. I shot Jack a grateful glance. He'd stepped into the conversation as if he'd been part of Daniel's life all along, defending my son's accomplishments without missing a beat. James looked slightly taken aback. Of course. Didn't mean to imply otherwise. Just that connections never hurt in this business. So, Jack, Elizabeth said, clearly attempting to change the subject. How do you know the happy couple? Before Jack could answer, I jumped in. Jack is actually Daniel's godfather. He and my late husband were best friends in the Navy. Oh! Sandra looked between us with renewed interest. I had no idea. Daniel never mentioned a godfather. We lost touch for a while, Jack explained, his tone casual, but his eyes carefully watching my reaction. But Eleanor and I have recently reconnected. The conversation shifted to general topics, the beautiful venue, the perfect weather, speculation about the dinner menu. I sipped my champagne and tried to appear engaged, but my attention kept drifting to the other side of the terrace where the wedding party had gathered for what appeared to be informal photographs. Daniel stood beside Vanessa, his arm around her waist, surrounded by their attendants holding cocktails and laughing. He looked happy in that moment, relaxed in a way he hadn't during the ceremony. I watched as he threw his head back in laughter. At something one of the groomsmen said, the gesture so reminiscent of Harold that my heart clenched. In profile, with his guard down, he was his father's son through and through. Would you excuse me for a moment? I said to our group. I just need to use the restroom. Jack's eyes met mine, silently asking if I was okay. I gave him a reassuring nod before making my way through the crowd. I didn't actually need the restroom. I just needed a momentary escape, a few minutes to compose myself away from curious eyes and polite conversation. I found a quiet alcove near the entrance to the main house, partially hidden by an enormous arrangement of white hydrangeas and roses. Leaning against the cool stone wall, I closed my eyes and took several deep breaths. Ms. Barnes? I startled, opening my eyes to find Zoe, the assistant coordinator, standing before me with a concerned expression. I'm sorry to disturb you, she said. But I wanted to let you know that dinner will be served in about 20 minutes. The photographer has requested that all family members gather near the rose garden for a few casual shots before everyone moves to the reception tent. My heart leapt before I could temper my reaction. Family members? Does that include me? Zoe's expression became guarded. I'm not entirely sure. Let me check with Claire. She hurried away, leaving me in a state of painful uncertainty. Hope flickered to life despite my best efforts to suppress it. Perhaps Daniel had intervened. Perhaps he'd realized the cruelty of excluding his mother from all photographic evidence of his wedding day. I straightened my dress and touched my hair, making sure everything was still in place. Jack appeared at the entrance to the alcove, 2 fresh champagne flutes in hand. There you are, he said. I was starting to worry. The coordinator just told me they're gathering family for casual photos, I explained, unable to keep the cautious optimism from my voice. She's checking if I should be included. Jack's expression softened. Of course you should be included. You're his mother. Before I could respond, Zoe returned, her professional smile firmly in place, but not quite reaching her eyes. Ms. Barnes, I've spoken with Mrs. Harrington. The current photo session is for the wedding party and the bride's extended family only. The groom's side will be included in some of the reception photos later. The hope that had begun to bloom withered. Instantly, I managed to maintain my composure, thanking Zoe for the clarification while accepting the champagne Jack offered. Their loss, Jack said after Zoe departed. You're the most photogenic person here. The compliment, delivered with such straightforward sincerity, unexpectedly brought tears to my eyes. I blinked them back quickly, determined not to let emotion overtake me. I'm being silly, I said. It's just photos. It's not silly, Jack replied firmly. And it's not just photos. It's about respect and acknowledgement. Eleanor, what they're doing, what Daniel is allowing them to do, is wrong. I couldn't argue with him. It was wrong. The systematic erasure of my role in Daniel's life, the careful excising of my presence from the official record of his wedding day, it reflected a deeper, more painful truth about how my son now viewed me. As someone to be tolerated but not celebrated, acknowledged but not embraced. We should head to our table, I said finally. I don't want to make a scene by being late. Jack looked like he wanted to say more, but instead offered his arm. Table 19 awaits. Let's show them what they're missing in those photos. The reception tent was a marvel of design, a vast white structure with clear panels in the ceiling to reveal the emerging stars. Inside, dozens of round tables surrounded a central dance floor, each one adorned with towering floral arrangements and gold-accented place settings. Soft lighting created an intimate atmosphere despite the space's size, and more string lights twinkled overhead like a manufactured night sky. Table 19 was positioned near the back of the tent, far from the elevated head table where the wedding party would be seated. As the coordinator had mentioned, it was adjacent to Sandra's table, but otherwise surrounded by groups of people I didn't recognize. Our table mates were already seated when we arrived. 2 couples approximately our age and a single woman who introduced herself as Vanessa's former piano teacher. I taught her for 12 years, she explained as we settled into our assigned seats. Technically gifted, but never quite captured the emotion of the pieces. It was such an unexpectedly candid assessment that I nearly choked on my water. Jack's hand found my knee under the table, giving it a gentle squeeze. Dinner was served, a choice of beef tenderloin or sea bass, accompanied by seasonal vegetables and tiny potatoes. The food was expertly prepared, but I found myself eating mechanically, my appetite diminished by the emotional strain of the day. Around us, conversation flowed, with our table mates politely including us, but clearly wondering about our connection. To the wedding party. So you're Daniel's mother, one of the women said finally, unable to contain her curiosity. He's such an impressive young man. You must have done something right. Thank you, I replied. I'm very proud of him. And you're his godfather? She continued, looking at Jack with interest. Jack nodded. Since the day he was born. How lovely that you could both be here, the piano teacher commented, her tone suggesting she knew more about the situation than she was letting on. Family is so important at these milestones. The irony of her statement hung in the air between us. Jack cleared his throat. Eleanor raised Daniel alone after his father died, he said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by our table mates but not beyond. She worked double shifts as a pediatric nurse to provide for him, helped him earn a full scholarship to university, and supported him through every challenge and triumph of his life. There's not a person in this room who deserves more recognition. Today, a hush fell over our table. I stared at Jack, moved by his defense but also slightly mortified by the attention. The piano teacher nodded slowly. "As I suspected," she said. "The good ones often go unappreciated." Before anyone could respond, the clinking of glasses announced the beginning of the toasts. All eyes turned to the head table where the best man was rising, microphone in hand. The formal portion of the evening was beginning, drawing attention away from our small corner of the celebration. As the speeches continued, the best man's humorous anecdotes, the maid of honor's tearful tribute, Philip Harrington's polished welcome of Daniel to the family. I found myself wondering if I would have been asked to speak in a different version of this day. If, in a world where Vanessa had embraced rather than tolerated me, I might have had the opportunity to publicly celebrate my son and welcome his bride. The thought followed me through the cake cutting, through the carefully choreographed first dance, through all the traditional moments that marked the evening's progression. I participated as required, smiling, applauding, raising my glass in toasts, but felt increasingly like a spectator rather than a participant in my own son's milestone. The reception progressed with clockwork precision, each tradition unfolding, exactly as scheduled in whatever detailed timeline Corinne Harrington had undoubtedly approved. After the first dance, the DJ announced the father-daughter dance, and Philip led Vanessa onto the floor to the strains of "The Way You Look Tonight." They moved with practiced ease, their performance polished and camera-ready. When the song ended, the DJ's voice came through the speakers again. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, we invite the groom to share a special dance with his mother." My heart stopped. There must be some mistake. No one had mentioned this to me, no rehearsal, no warning, nothing. I sat frozen in my chair as heads turned in my direction, searching for the mother of the groom who should be rising to join her son. Jack leaned close. "Eleanor, did you know about this?" I shook my head mutely, panic rising in my chest. Across the tent, I could see Daniel standing awkwardly at the edge of the dance floor, his expression a mixture of confusion and discomfort. Claire, the wedding coordinator, was whispering urgently to Corinne Harrington, whose face had transformed into a mask of displeasure. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only seconds, the DJ spoke again, his tone slightly less confident. "I apologize for the confusion. We'll be moving directly to the open dancing portion of our evening. Everyone is welcome to join the newlyweds on the dance floor." The band immediately launched into an upbeat song, and several guests moved to the dance floor, effectively covering the awkward moment. But the damage was done. The absence of the traditional mother-son dance hung in the air like an accusation, highlighting my exclusion more dramatically than any seating arrangement or photo session could have. "I need some air," I whispered to Jack, rising from my seat, before he could respond. I made my way through the reception tent as quickly as dignity would allow, avoiding eye contact with the curious onlookers who had witnessed my public humiliation. Outside, the night air had cooled considerably, providing relief from both the tent's warmth and my burning embarrassment. I found a stone bench in a small garden area, partially hidden by ornamental shrubs, and sank down gratefully. The sounds of the reception, music, laughter, clinking glasses, seemed distant now, belonging to a celebration I was increasingly certain I should never have attended. "Mom?" I looked up to find Daniel standing a few feet away, his hands shoved into his pockets, his expression unreadable in the dim garden lighting. "Daniel," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Congratulations. It was a beautiful ceremony." He shifted uncomfortably. "Can I sit?" I nodded, moving slightly to make room on the bench. He sat beside me, maintaining careful distance between us, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "There was a miscommunication about the dances," he finally said. "It wasn't on the final schedule I approved. The DJ got it wrong." I turned to look at my son, really look at him, for the first time that day. His face, so much like Harold's, was tense with some emotion I couldn't quite identify. Guilt? Embarrassment? Genuine regret? Perhaps a combination of all three. A miscommunication, I repeated, the word tasting bitter. Like the miscommunication about the family photos? Or my seating assignment? Or the rehearsal dinner I wasn't invited to? Daniel winced. Mom, it's not like that. Then what is it like, Daniel? Please explain it to me because I've been trying to understand all day why my only son would allow his mother to be treated like an unwelcome obligation at his wedding. He ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, disrupting it. It's complicated. Vanessa's family has certain expectations, traditions. They've been planning this day since she was born. And those traditions don't include the groom's mother? You don't understand. Philip and Corinne are connected to everyone who matters in Northbrook. Vanessa's father is on the board of Meridian Partners. My entire career, our future, it all depends on maintaining certain relationships. The implications of his words hit me with physical force. My son was actively choosing his in-laws' approval and the social and professional advantages they offered over his relationship with me. It wasn't forgetfulness or oversight that had led to my exclusion. It was calculated decision-making. I see, I said quietly. And where exactly do I fit into this carefully constructed future of yours? Daniel looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Mom, you know I love you. But you have to understand. Vanessa and I are building something here. Sometimes that means making difficult choices. Difficult choices, I echoed. Like choosing between acknowledging your mother's existence or pleasing your in-laws. That's not fair. No, I agreed. It's not fair at all. I raised you alone after your father died. I worked double shifts to make sure you had every opportunity. I sat through every baseball game, every science fair, every parent-teacher conference. I was there for every moment of your life, Daniel. Every single one. My voice broke slightly, but I forced myself to continue. And now, on one of the most important days of your life, you've decided I don't fit into the picture. Literally and figuratively, Daniel's jaw tightened. I invited you, didn't I? You're here. As what? A distant acquaintance seated with strangers? The embarrassing relation who might say the wrong thing or wear the wrong color or remind everyone that you come from modest beginnings instead of a mansion with a name. He stood abruptly. This is exactly why Vanessa was concerned. You always make everything about yourself. The accusation stunned me into momentary silence. When had my son, my thoughtful, empathetic boy, become this defensive stranger? I've never made anything about myself, I said finally, my voice low. My entire life has been about you. But there's a difference between making something about oneself and expecting basic dignity and respect. Daniel checked his watch, a clear signal that he was ready to end this conversation. I should get back. They'll be cutting the cake soon. Of course, I said. You wouldn't want to disappoint the Harringtons. He hesitated, perhaps registering the hurt beneath my sarcasm. For a moment, I thought he might say something more. Might offer some real explanation or apology. Instead, he simply nodded stiffly. I'll see you inside, he said, already turning away. I remained on the bench after he left, trying to process what had just happened. The garden was quiet, except for the muffled sounds of the reception and the occasional rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. I closed my eyes, feeling suddenly exhausted by the emotional toll of the day. Mind if I join you? I looked up to find Jack standing nearby, holding 2 slices of cake on small plates. I thought you might want some dessert, he said, settling beside me on the bench and offering one of the plates. It's actually quite good. Vanilla bean with raspberry filling, though I suspect the frosting is that fancy type that looks better than it tastes. The normalcy of his observation, the simple kindness of bringing me cake when I needed comfort, It was so unexpected that I felt tears welling up. "I just spoke with Daniel," I said, accepting the plate but setting it aside. "It wasn't a miscommunication. None of it was. He's deliberately minimizing my presence to please Vanessa's family." Jack's expression darkened. "What exactly did he say?" I repeated the conversation as accurately as I could, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. Jack listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening progressively as I spoke. "That doesn't sound like the Daniel I knew," he said when I finished. "The boy who spent an entire weekend building you that crooked birdhouse for Mother's Day, who insisted on inviting his entire Little League team to your birthday party because Mom deserves a big celebration." "People change," I said softly. "Not that much. Not without cause." Jack set his own plate aside and turned to face me fully. "Eleanor, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have explained before we came here today." The seriousness in his tone alarmed me. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "Our falling out 15 years ago. It wasn't just about that argument over the fishing trip. There was more to it." I frowned, confused by this sudden change of subject. "Jack, I'm not sure this is the time." "It is," he insisted, "because it might explain what's happening with Daniel." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "After that fight, when we stopped speaking, I noticed Daniel started acting differently around me. Distant, almost hostile. At first, I thought he was just being protective of you, taking your side. But then I ran into him at the hardware store one day, and he refused to even acknowledge me." Jack's expression was troubled, the memories clearly painful. I cornered him, asked what was going on, and he told me. He stopped, swallowing hard. "He told me that Vanessa had heard some rumors about me, about why Harold and I were so close." Understanding dawned slowly. "What kind of rumors?" "The kind that imply two men can't be just friends, that there had to be something more, and that after Harold died, I was trying to take his place in more ways than one." I stared at him, horrified. "That's ridiculous. Anyone who knew you and Harold would know that's absurd." "Of course it is. But Vanessa didn't know us back then, and apparently her father has some old-fashioned views about men like me who never married." Jack's eyes met mine, his expression raw with hurt and anger. "Daniel said he didn't believe it, but he thought it would be better if we weren't seen together anymore. For appearances' sake." "For appearances' sake," I repeated, the phrase echoing Daniel's earlier justifications. "So this started long before today?" Jack nodded grimly. "I think the Harringtons have been working on separating Daniel from his past, from anything they consider beneath them, since he and Vanessa first got serious. And I suspect I was just the beginning." The revelation settled over me like a physical weight. This wasn't just about one day or one event. This was about a systematic campaign to reshape my son into someone who fit the Harrington mold, someone without a middle-class nurse for a mother or a godfather who might provoke gossip. "Why? Didn't you tell me this before?" I asked. "Because I was ashamed," Jack admitted. "Ashamed that I let it happen, that I didn't fight harder for our friendship, for my place in Daniel's life, that I walked away when I should have stood my ground." Before I could respond, the sound of footsteps on the garden path alerted us to someone's approach. We both looked up to see Claire, the wedding coordinator, her professional smile firmly in place despite the tension evident in her posture. "Ms. Barnes, Mr. Emerson," she said, "I wanted to let you know that the bouquet and garter tosses will be happening shortly, followed by the farewell procession. If you'd like to be part of those events, you might want to return to the reception." "Thank you, Claire," I replied, matching her professional tone. "We'll be right there." After she left, Jack and I exchanged a look that contained volumes of unspoken understanding. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I considered the question carefully. My instinct was to leave, to slip away quietly and lick my wounds in private. But something in me rebelled against that option. I had done nothing wrong. I deserved to be there as much as anyone in that reception tent. I want to stay, I said finally. I want to see this through. And then I want to figure out what comes. Next? Jack reached for my hand, his grip warm and reassuring. Then that's what we'll do. Together. We returned to the reception tent just as the DJ was announcing the bouquet toss. Young women gathered at the front of the dance floor, giggling and positioning themselves strategically as Vanessa prepared to throw her bridal bouquet over her shoulder. Jack and I slipped back to our table, where our half-eaten dinners had been cleared away and coffee service had begun. You missed the cake cutting, Sandra informed us as we sat down. It was quite the production, 5 tiers, sugar flowers that looked exactly like the real ones in the centerpieces. The Harringtons spared no expense. I'm sure it was lovely, I replied, reaching for my water glass. My throat felt parched after the emotional conversation with Daniel and Jack. Across the tent, Vanessa tossed her bouquet into the crowd of waiting women. One of the bridesmaids caught it, shrieking with delight as her friends hugged her. The scene was so normal, so expected, like something from a wedding-themed movie, that for a moment it was possible to forget the undercurrents of tension and exclusion that had defined my day. The garter toss followed, with Daniel performing, the traditional removal with exaggerated modesty that earned hoots from his groomsmen. I watched my son, trying to reconcile the man before me, playing his part in this elaborate social ritual, with both the boy I had raised and the person who had so callously dismissed me just minutes ago in the garden. You okay? Jack asked quietly, his hand finding mine under the table. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The truth was more complicated than a simple yes or no could express. I wasn't okay, not really, but I was managing. I was surviving this day moment by moment, holding on to whatever dignity I could salvage. The DJ transitioned to slower music, inviting couples to join the newlyweds on the dance floor. Jack glanced at me, a question in his eyes. Would you care to dance, Eleanor? The invitation surprised me. Are you sure? I'm not exactly in the right frame of mind for dancing. Sometimes moving helps more than sitting still, he replied. Besides, I've been wanting to dance with you since 1982 at Harold's Navy reunion. You wore a blue dress then, too. The memory, so specific, so unexpected, caught me off guard. You remember that? That was over 40 years ago. Jack's smile was gentle. Some things stick with you. Before I could respond, he was standing and offering his hand. Something in his steady gaze, in the quiet confidence of his posture, made refusal impossible. I placed my hand in his and allowed him to lead me to the dance floor. Jack was a competent dancer, neither showy nor awkward. He held me with respectful distance, but enough closeness to provide support, much like his approach. To the entire day, as we moved to the slow melody, I gradually felt some of the tension leaving my body. Thank you for coming with me today, I said. I'm not sure I could have managed alone. You'd have managed, Jack replied with certainty. You're the strongest person I know, Eleanor. Always have been. I don't feel very strong right now. That's the thing about strength. It's not about never feeling hurt or broken. It's about continuing anyway. We danced in silence for a moment, his words settling between us like a truth I'd forgotten. I've missed you, Jack, I admitted finally. All these years, what a waste. Not a waste, he corrected. A detour, maybe. But we're here now. As the song ended, a commotion near the entrance to the tent caught my attention. A tall, elderly man with a distinguished bearing had entered, causing a stir among the guests. He moved with the help of an ornate cane, his formal attire impeccable despite appearing slightly outdated in style. Who's that? I wondered aloud as Jack and I returned to our table. Sandra leaned over, her expression animated. That's Walter. Harrington, Philip's father, the patriarch. I heard he wasn't expected to attend due to his health. He must be at least 90, I observed. "93, Sandra confirmed, "and still sharp as a tack, according to Ryan. He's the one who built the Harrington investment firm into what it is today." We watched as Walter made his way slowly through the crowd. Guests parted respectfully, many stopping to greet him with obvious deference. When he reached the head table, Vanessa immediately stood to embrace him, her expression showing genuine warmth for perhaps the first time that day. Philip Harrington appeared at his father's side, helping him to a seat that was quickly arranged at the head table. Corinne hovered nearby, her practiced smile firmly in place but her eyes darting around the room as if checking who was witnessing this unexpected arrival. "Interesting," Jack murmured. "She doesn't look thrilled to see her father-in-law. Family dynamics," Sandra whispered knowingly. Word is that Walter never quite approved of Corinne, thought she was more interested in the Harrington name than in his son. I wasn't particularly interested in Harrington family gossip, but I couldn't help noticing the subtle shift in the reception's atmosphere following Walter's arrival. There was a sense of realignment, as if the carefully balanced power structure had been disrupted by the presence of this elderly man with his imposing cane and watchful eyes. Daniel approached the head table, bending to greet his new grandfather-in-law, with a handshake that Walter transformed into a brief embrace. They spoke for a few moments, Walter's expression animated despite his age. Then, to my surprise, Walter appeared to ask Daniel a question, gesturing toward the room as his gaze swept across the guests. "I think he's asking about you," Jack said suddenly. "What? Why would he be asking about me?" "Because Daniel just looked in our direction." I followed Jack's gaze to see that my son was indeed glancing our way, his expression difficult to read. From this distance, he turned back to Walter, speaking earnestly while the older man listened with evident attention. After what appeared to be a brief but intense conversation, Walter slowly rose to his feet, leaning heavily on his cane. Daniel offered his arm for support, but the older man shook his head, pointing instead toward our table with a decisive gesture. "I think they're coming over here," I said, my pulse quickening inexplicably. "We should stand," Jack suggested, already rising to his feet. I followed suit, straightening my dress and touching my hair in an automatic gesture of self-consciousness. Around us, conversations quieted as people noticed Walter Harrington making his deliberate way across the reception tent, Daniel one step behind him. When they reached our table, Walter Harrington stopped, his keen eyes finding mine immediately. Up close, I could see the years etched deeply into his face, but there was nothing diminished about his presence or the sharpness of his gaze. "Ms. Barnes," he said, his voice surprisingly strong despite his age. "I'm Walter Harrington. I understand. You're Daniel's mother." "Yes," I replied, extending my hand. "Eleanor Barnes. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Harrington." He took my hand in both of his, cool, dry skin over surprisingly strong bones. "The pleasure is mine. I apologize for not making your acquaintance earlier. I only arrived a short time ago. Grandfather's doctor only cleared him to attend this morning," Daniel explained, his tone carrying an edge of nervousness I hadn't heard since he was a teenager. "We didn't expect him to make it." Walter made a dismissive sound, as if I would miss my only granddaughter's wedding. "Now, Ms. Barnes." "Eleanor, please." "Eleanor," he amended with a slight nod. "I understand you raised this young man entirely, on your own after his father passed away." The directness of the question startled me. "Yes, since Daniel was 5. "And you were a nurse?" "I was. Pediatric nursing at Willowbrook Community Hospital for 30 years. Walter nodded, as if confirming information he'd already gathered. "Admirable profession. My late wife was a nurse during the war. Toughest person I ever knew." There was a warmth in his tone when he mentioned his wife that softened his formal demeanor. I found myself wondering what kind of marriage they had shared, what kind of father he had been to Philip. "And this gentleman," Walter continued, turning his attention to Jack. "Jack Emerson, sir," Jack said, extending his hand. I'm Daniel's godfather. His father and I served together in the Navy. A look of recognition crossed Walter's face. Navy men. I was Army myself, but I respect anyone who served. What was your rank, Mr. Emerson? Chief Petty Officer, sir. USS. Constellation. Walter's eyebrows rose slightly. Good ship, good men. The exchange had the feel of a military inspection. Brisk, evaluative, but not unkind. Walter turned back to me, his expression softening further. My grandson tells me there's been some oversight regarding your inclusion in today's festivities. Beside him, Daniel shifted uncomfortably, not meeting my eyes. I hesitated, uncertain how to respond without creating more tension. It's a busy day, I offered diplomatically. I'm sure many details required attention. Walter's sharp eyes suggested he wasn't fooled by my evasion. Indeed. Well, I believe one such detail was a traditional dance between mother and son. Perhaps we can rectify that oversight now? Before anyone could respond, Walter raised his cane slightly, catching the attention of the DJ. With a gesture that spoke of decades of authority, he signaled for the music to stop. Grandfather, Daniel began, alarm evident in his voice. I'm not sure this is the right time. Nonsense, Walter interrupted. There's no better time than the present to correct a mistake. The music faded, and the DJ's voice came through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special request from Mr. Walter Harrington. If I could ask everyone to clear the dance floor for a moment. Conversation ceased as guests turned their attention to our small group. I felt a flush creeping up my neck at being the center of such unexpected attention. Jack's hand found the small of my back again, a silent gesture of support. Walter turned toward the crowd, his voice projecting with surprising strength. For those who don't know me, I'm Vanessa's grandfather. It's come to my attention that we've overlooked an important tradition today, the dance between the groom and his mother. A murmur rippled through the guests. At the head table, I could see Corinne Harrington's face tighten with barely concealed displeasure. In my day, Walter continued, either oblivious to or unconcerned by his daughter-in-law's reaction, we honored mothers, especially those who sacrificed everything to raise their children alone. He turned to Daniel. I believe you have a dance to fulfill, young man. The spotlight, both literal and figurative, shifted to Daniel, who stood frozen beside his grandfather. His expression was a complex mixture of emotions, embarrassment, conflict, and something that might have been relief. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only seconds, Daniel extended his hand toward me. Mom? May I have this dance? Team Dean seemed to slow as I looked at my son's extended hand. The bustling reception tent, the hundreds of watching eyes, the tension radiating from the head table, all of it faded into background noise as I faced this moment of decision. I placed my hand in Daniel's. Yes, I said simply. You may. Walter Harrington nodded with satisfaction, then signaled to the DJ again. Something appropriate, if you please. As Daniel led me to the center of the dance floor, the opening notes of What a Wonderful World filled the tent, a classic choice for mother-son dances, though not one we had discussed or planned. Daniel placed his hand respectfully at my waist, holding my other hand in proper dance position. I'm sorry, he whispered as we began to move. For everything today. I studied my son's face, the face I had memorized in all its expressions since the moment the nurse had placed him in my arms over 3 decades ago. There was genuine remorse there, but also fear and uncertainty, as if he were balanced precariously between 2 worlds and afraid of falling from either. Is this apology yours? I asked softly. Or is it Walter Harrington's? Daniel flinched slightly. Mine. But I needed his perspective. What did he say to you? My son's eyes darted briefly toward his new grandfather-in-law, who was watching our dance with evident approval. He asked where you were sitting. When I told him you were at table 19, he asked why my mother wasn't at the family table. I didn't have a good answer. And he said, Daniel's voice dropped even lower, that a man who doesn't honor his mother has no foundation to build anything lasting. The wisdom in Walter's assessment surprised me. It was old-fashioned in its phrasing, but timeless in its truth. Your grandfather-in-law seems like a remarkable man, I observed. He is. Vanessa adores him, says he's the only one in her family who sees past appearances. Daniel's steps faltered slightly as he added, he also asked about Jack. What? About him? Why my godfather was seated at table 19 instead of with family. Daniel's gaze shifted briefly toward Jack, who was watching our dance with an unreadable expression. When I explained, he called me a fool. Said the Navy men he knew would rather cut off their right arm than betray a shipmate's honor, and that my father would be ashamed of me for believing gossip over loyalty. The bluntness of Walter's judgment must have stung, but I couldn't disagree with his assessment. Harold would indeed have been disappointed by Daniel's willingness to discard Jack based on rumors and appearances. He sounds like he doesn't mince words, I said. He doesn't. Daniel's smile was rueful. Vanessa says it's why her father is always so tense around him. Grandfather Walter doesn't care about social positioning or what people think. He built his company from nothing and never forgot where he came from. As we moved across the floor, I became aware of the cameras documenting our dance, the official photographer and videographer capturing this moment that had almost been erased from the day's schedule. I wondered if Corinne Harrington would attempt to exclude these images from the final wedding album as well. Daniel, I said carefully, I understand wanting to make a good impression on Vanessa's family. I understand wanting to fit into their world. But at what cost? He didn't answer immediately, his expression troubled. Around us, the reception guests watched with varying degrees of interest and emotion. Some were clearly touched by the delayed mother-son dance. Others seemed confused by the drama playing out before them. I got lost somewhere, Daniel finally admitted, his voice so quiet I had to strain to hear it over the music. Between wanting to be worthy of Vanessa and forgetting to be worthy of my own history. It happened so gradually I didn't notice until today. When you found yourself with a mother who didn't fit the Harrington image. He winced. It sounds terrible when you say it like that. Sometimes the truth is terrible, Daniel. But it's still the truth. The song was nearing its conclusion, the famous gravelly voice singing about trees of green and red roses too. Daniel's grip on my hand tightened slightly. Can we talk tomorrow? Really talk? There's so much I need to say, to explain. I studied my son's face, seeing both the man he had become and the boy he had been. Yes, I agreed. Tomorrow. As the final notes of the song faded, Daniel surprised me by drawing me into a proper embrace, the kind of hug he used to give before Vanessa, before Meridian Partners, before he started measuring his worth against the Harrington standard. His arms wrapped around me tightly, his cheek resting against my hair. I love you, Mom, he whispered. I'm so sorry. The sincerity in his voice brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I returned his embrace, feeling a cautious hope begin to stir beneath my hurt and disappointment. I love you too, Daniel. Always. Have, always will. When we separated, I noticed Walter Harrington approaching us, his cane tapping rhythmically against the polished dance floor. Behind him, to my surprise, was Vanessa, her expression a mixture of discomfort and resignation. Well, done, Walter said approvingly. Traditions matter, especially the ones that honor those who sacrificed for us. He turned to his granddaughter. Vanessa, I believe you have something to say to Mrs. Barnes. Vanessa's perfect bridal appearance had begun to show small signs of strain. A loose tendril of hair, a slight smudge of mascara beneath one eye. She straightened her shoulders and met my gaze directly. Ms. Barnes, she began, her voice composed but lacking its earlier cool detachment. I owe you an apology. My focus on creating a perfect day led me to make decisions that were inconsiderate. I hope you can forgive the oversight. It wasn't the most heartfelt apology I'd ever received, but I recognize the effort it took for her to make it at all, especially under the watchful eye of her formidable grandfather. Thank you, Vanessa, I replied evenly. I appreciate that. Walter nodded, apparently satisfied with this exchange. Now, he said, I believe Mr. Emerson should join us. Daniel mentioned he's been a part of your family since before the boy was born. Daniel hesitated only briefly before nodding. I'll get him, Grandfather Walter. As Daniel went to retrieve Jack, I found myself standing somewhat awkwardly with Vanessa and Walter. The elder Harrington studied me with keen interest, seemingly untroubled by the social tension. My grandson tells me you were a pediatric nurse for 30 years, he said. That takes a special kind of strength. It was challenging work, I acknowledged, but deeply rewarding. My Ida, my late wife, said the same about nursing, said it taught her what truly matters in life. His eyes, sharp despite his age, held mine. Something many in my family could stand to learn. Vanessa shifted uncomfortably beside her grandfather. Grandfather, perhaps we should return to the head table. The farewell preparations will be starting soon. In a moment, dear, Walter replied mildly but firmly. I'm getting acquainted with Daniel's family. The family I should have been introduced to months ago. His pointed remark caused Vanessa to flush slightly. Before she could respond, Daniel returned with Jack in tow. Jack approached with the careful respect due to an elder, extending his hand to Walter. Mr. Harrington, it's an honor to meet you. Jack Emerson. Walter took his hand in a firm grip. The honor is mine, Chief Petty Officer. I understand you served with Daniel's father. Yes, sir. Harold Barnes was the finest man I ever knew. Walter nodded, as if confirming something to himself. And you've remained connected to the family all these years? As much as circumstances allowed, Jack replied diplomatically, his eyes briefly meeting Daniel's. Walter seemed to absorb the subtext of this exchange. Family isn't always blood, he observed. Sometimes it's the people who stand by us through everything, who remember where we came from even when we're tempted to forget. An uncomfortable silence followed this pronouncement. Around us, the reception continued, guests dancing and chatting, largely unaware of the significant conversation occurring in our small circle. At the head table, I noticed Philip Harrington watching us with evident concern, while Corinne appeared to be distracting some of the other family members from our gathering. Well, Walter said finally, I've disrupted the proceedings enough, for one evening. Vanessa, my dear, it's been a beautiful wedding, worthy of a Harrington. He patted her hand affectionately. But remember what I've always told you. A name is only as good as the person who bears it. And that worth is measured in character, not connections. Vanessa's expression softened as she looked at her grandfather. I remember, Grandpa. Good girl. He turned to Daniel. Young man, I look forward to knowing you better. Your mother and godfather have given me a promising impression of your foundation. Daniel nodded, appearing both chastened and unexpectedly grateful for the older man's directness. Thank you, sir. I hope to live up to that foundation. Walter turned to me last, his weathered hand reaching for mine. Mrs. Barnes, it has been a genuine pleasure. I hope we'll see more of you at family gatherings. A woman who raised such a son on her own deserves a place of honor, not a table at the back of the room. His bluntness was startling but refreshing after a day of careful pretense and social navigation. I found myself smiling genuinely for perhaps the first time since arriving at Rosewood Estate. Thank you, Mr. Harrington. I'd like that. Walter, please, he corrected. We're family now, after all. With that pronouncement, he signaled to a nearby staff member who quickly brought his wheelchair. Despite his earlier determination to walk, Walter eased himself into the chair with the practical acceptance of a man who knew his limitations. Now, if you'll excuse me, these old bones need a rest before the grand farewell. Vanessa, Daniel, Carrie, on with your celebrations. But remember what matters. As Walter was wheeled back toward the head table, Vanessa turned to follow, pausing only to give Daniel's arm a quick squeeze. "I'll see you for the sparkler exit," she said, her voice carrying a hint of warning. "Mother's already upset about the schedule disruption." When she was gone, Daniel turned to Jack and me, his expression a complex mixture of emotions. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, "except that I've handled everything wrong today. Wrong for months, actually." Jack, who had remained tactfully silent during much of the exchange with Walter, finally spoke. "You're not the first young man to lose his way trying to prove himself, Daniel. The important thing is finding your path back." Daniel met Jack's gaze with evident difficulty. "The things Vanessa's father said about you, I should never have listened. I knew they weren't true, but I was so focused on fitting in with them that I—" He broke off, shaking his head. "I have no excuse." "We can talk about all this tomorrow," I intervened, noticing that several guests were beginning to watch our huddle with curious interest. "Today is still your wedding day. You should be celebrating, not dealing with family reckonings." Daniel nodded, visibly gathering himself. "You're right, but I want you both at the farewell, not standing in the back, but right up front with the family, where you belong." It was a small gesture, perhaps, but the symbolism wasn't lost on any of us. I glanced at Jack, who gave a slight nod of encouragement. "We'll be there," I promised. As Daniel returned to his duties as groom, Jack and I made our way back to our table. Sandra and the others immediately leaned forward, their curiosity palpable. "What on earth was that all about?" Sandra asked. "First the dance, then that intense conversation with Walter Harrington himself. The whole room is buzzing. Just a family matter being sorted out," I replied simply, not wanting to fuel the wedding gossip further. Jack's hand found mine under the table, a quiet gesture of solidarity. "Sometimes," he added, "it takes someone with nothing to prove to." "Remind us what's truly important." The unexpected wisdom in his observation struck me. Walter Harrington, secure in his position and unburdened by the social climbing that seemed to preoccupy his son and daughter-in-law, had been free to see the situation clearly and to speak truth without fear of consequences. "Do you think anything will really change?" I asked Jack quietly as our table mates returned to their own conversations. "Hard to say," he admitted, "but something already has. Look around." I followed his gesture to see that the dynamics of the reception had subtly shifted. The barrier that had seemed to exist between me and the celebration had dissolved. Guests who had previously avoided eye contact now smiled in recognition. The wedding coordinator, Claire, approached our table to personally ensure we had everything we needed. And across the room, I noticed Corinne Harrington watching us with a new wariness, as if reassessing her earlier dismissal. "One dance didn't change all that," I said skeptically. "No," Jack agreed. "But Walter Harrington's approval did. Never underestimate the power of the patriarch in families like this." As the DJ announced the beginning of the farewell preparations, I couldn't help but wonder what this new development meant for my relationship with Daniel going forward. The hurt of the day's earlier exclusions hadn't magically vanished, but alongside it now existed a tentative hope, a possibility that my son might find his way back to the values I had raised him with, despite the gilded distraction of Harrington expectations. "Ready for the grand finale?" Jack asked, offering his arm as guests began moving toward the exit for the sparkler send-off. I took his arm, drawing strength from his steady presence. "As ready as I'll ever be." The farewell preparations transformed the front lawn of Rosewood Estate into a twinkling fairyland. Staff distributed long sparklers to the guests as we assembled in 2 lines, creating a pathway from the mansion's grand entrance to the vintage Rolls-Royce waiting at the end of the drive. The night had grown cooler, and Jack removed his suit jacket, draping it gently around my shoulders without comment. "They certainly know how to create a spectacle," he observed, looking around at the elaborate setup. Crystal lanterns hung from the tree branches overhead, supplementing the sparklers with a softer, more consistent glow. Flower petals had been scattered along the pathway, and somewhere in the distance, a string quartet played quietly. Claire, the wedding coordinator, moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency, organizing guests into their positions. When she reached us, her professional demeanor had softened considerably from our earlier interactions. "Ms. Barnes, Mr. Emerson," she said. "Daniel has requested that you stand here near the beginning of the pathway." She guided us to a spot just a few feet away from where the wedding party would assemble, prime positioning for the farewell. "Thank you, Claire," I replied, noting the significance of our placement. Not tucked away in the back with distant acquaintances, but prominently positioned near the front, where family would typically stand. As the guests continued to arrange themselves, I spotted Corinne Harrington speaking intently with Philip near the mansion's entrance. Her gestures, though restrained, conveyed obvious agitation. Philip appeared to be attempting to calm her, his hand on her arm, his expression placating. A few feet away, Walter Harrington sat in his wheelchair, observing the scene with what appeared to be mild amusement. "Looks like there's dissent in the ranks," Jack murmured. "Walter certainly disrupted their careful plans," I acknowledged. "Though I can't bring myself to feel sorry for Corinne. Nor should you. Some lessons are necessary, even if they're uncomfortable." Before I could respond, the wedding party began to emerge from the mansion. Bridesmaids and groomsmen paired off, taking their positions near the start of the pathway. The maid of honor appeared, followed by the best man, both of them slightly disheveled after hours of celebration, but smiling gamely for the official photographer documenting every moment. Then came Vanessa's parents, Philip walking stiffly, Corinne maintaining her perfect smile despite the tension evident in her posture. As they passed us, Corinne's eyes met mine briefly. There was no warmth there, no reconciliation, but perhaps a grudging acknowledgement that the dynamics had shifted beyond her control. Walter was next, pushed in his wheelchair by one of the groomsmen. He spotted Jack and me as he approached and insisted his attendant stop. "Mrs. Barnes," he said, reaching for my hand. "I wanted to tell you, I've invited Daniel and Vanessa to Sunday dinner at my home next month when they return from their honeymoon. I'd be honored if you and Mr. Emerson would join us." Corinne, who had paused just ahead, turned at this, her carefully composed expression slipping momentarily to reveal consternation. Walter either didn't notice or, more likely, didn't care. "That's very kind of you, Walter," I replied. "We'd be delighted." He patted my hand with satisfaction. "Excellent. Ida always said you could judge a man's character by how he treats his mother. I intend to make sure my new grandson-in-law remembers his." With that pronouncement, he signaled to his attendant to continue on, leaving Corinne to process this unexpected development. After a moment of visible internal struggle, she composed herself and continued down the path, head high, smile fixed firmly in place. "I think I'm beginning to like Walter Harrington," Jack commented as we watched them move away. "He's certainly a force to be reckoned with," I agreed. "Though I wonder if one Sunday dinner can really change anything substantial." Jack considered this. "Maybe not by itself, but it's a start, an acknowledgement that you have a legitimate place in Daniel's life, regardless of what Corinne might prefer." A hush fell over the assembled guests as the DJ announced the imminent appearance of the newlyweds. The sparklers were lit, creating a corridor of dancing light for Daniel and Vanessa to pass through. From the mansion's entrance, they emerged. To cheers and applause, Vanessa radiant in a simpler reception version of her wedding gown, Daniel handsome and beaming beside her. They paused at the top of the steps, waving to their guests, the picture of a perfect couple at the end of their perfect day. Then they began their procession down the sparkler-lit path. As they approached the spot where Jack and I stood, I held my breath, uncertain what to expect. Would they pass by with polite smiles, their focus on the path ahead? Or would there be some acknowledgement of the afternoon's upheaval? Daniel slowed as they reached us, his eyes meeting mine with genuine warmth for the first time that day. Without hesitation, he leaned in and kissed my cheek. "Thank you for being here, Mom," he said, his voice carrying enough for those nearby to hear. It meant everything to me. Vanessa, after a barely perceptible moment of hesitation, also leaned in to brush her cheek against mine. "Thank you, Eleanor," she added, her voice more formal but not unkind. "We'll see you at Grandfather Walter's dinner." It wasn't a particularly emotional exchange, but given the day's earlier events, it felt monumental, a public acknowledgement of my significance, delivered in front of the very guests who had witnessed my marginalization. As they continued down the path, I felt something tight and painful in my chest begin to loosen just slightly. "Progress," Jack observed quietly. "Small steps," I agreed. We remained in place as Daniel and Vanessa completed their journey to the waiting Rolls-Royce, climbing in amid more cheers and well wishes from their guests. The vintage car pulled away, trailing ribbons and clattering with the traditional cans tied to its bumper, carrying the newlyweds to their first night as husband and wife. As the sparklers burned down and guests began to disperse, some to their homes and others to the after-party at a nearby hotel, I found myself suddenly exhausted. The emotional roller coaster of the day, from hurt and humiliation to confrontation and cautious hope, had depleted my reserves more thoroughly than I'd realized. Jack must have noticed, because he placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Ready to go home?" Home. The word carried such weight after a day like today. Not the elegant Harrington mansion or Daniel's new life, but my modest blue cottage in Willowbrook with its hydrangea bushes and comfortable rooms. The place where I belonged, regardless of whether it matched the Harrington aesthetic. "More than ready," I admitted. We said our goodbyes to Sandra and our other table mates, exchanged contact information with a few of the more genuine connections we'd made, and began making our way toward the parking area. The night air had turned properly cool now, and I pulled Jack's jacket more tightly around my shoulders, grateful for its warmth. As we walked, a familiar figure approached from the direction of the mansion. Claire, the wedding coordinator, looking considerably more relaxed now that her official duties were concluding. "Ms. Barnes," she called, "I'm glad I caught you before you left." I paused, wondering what additional wedding business could possibly remain. "Is everything all right?" Yes, she assured me. "I just wanted to give you this." She held out a small white box tied with silver ribbon. "The wedding cake. We always save pieces for close family. Daniel was quite insistent that you should have yours." The simple gesture, being included in the tradition of preserving wedding cake for family, affected me more deeply than I would have expected. I accepted the box with a murmured, "Thank you," holding it carefully. "He's a good young man," Claire added, her professional reserve softening. "Even if he got a bit distracted by the Harrington expectations. It happens more often than you'd think in these high society weddings." "You've seen this before?" I asked, curious despite my exhaustion. Claire smiled knowingly. "More times than I can count. Families with money and position often have very specific ideas about how things should look, who should be included, whose connections matter. But at the end of the day," she shrugged, "the ones who remember what truly matters are the ones whose marriages actually last." With that surprisingly candid observation, she wished us a pleasant evening and returned to her duties. Jack and I continued to his car, now one of relatively few remaining in the parking area. The drive back to Willowbrook would take nearly an hour, and I found myself grateful for the buffer of time between the intensity of the wedding and the return to my everyday life. As Jack opened the passenger door for me, his hand lightly brushed mine, a casual contact that nonetheless sent an unexpected warmth through me. We'd spent the entire day together, navigating one of the most emotionally complex experiences of my recent life, and his steady presence had been my anchor throughout. "Jack," I said impulsively, "would you like to come in for coffee when we get back? It's late, I know, but—" "I'd like that very much," he replied, his expression gentle in the dim light of the parking area. "Besides, I'm not sure I'm ready for this day to end just yet." The drive passed in comfortable silence, both of us processing the events of the wedding in our own ways. The roads were nearly empty at this hour, and Jack drove with the same steady confidence he'd shown throughout the day. Occasionally, he would glance over at me, as if checking that I was still doing all right, but he didn't press me to talk. When we finally reached my cottage, the porch light I'd left on welcomed us with its soft glow. My hydrangeas were silvery, shadows in the moonlight, their blooms nodding gently in the night breeze. After the opulence of Rosewood Estate, my modest home might have seemed plain or inadequate, but to me it looked like exactly what it was: a sanctuary, created with care, and filled with genuine memories. Jack parked in the driveway and came around to open my door, offering his hand to help me out. I accepted it, noticing how natural the gesture felt after a day of such interactions. As we walked to the front door, I was acutely aware of his presence beside me. Solid, comforting, unhurried. "It looks exactly the same," he commented as I unlocked the door. The blue trim, the porch swing, even the brass door knocker Harold installed. "Some things are worth preserving," I replied, touched that he remembered such details after 15 years of absence. Inside, I switched on lamps rather than the overhead lights, creating a softer atmosphere. The cottage welcomed us with its familiar scents and textures, the lavender sachets I kept in the linen closet, the well-worn comfort of my furniture, the subtle creaks of a house that had aged alongside its owner. "Make yourself comfortable," I told Jack, gesturing to the living room. "I'll put on some coffee." In the kitchen, I went through the familiar motions of preparing coffee, finding the process soothing after the day's emotional turbulence. Through the doorway, I could see Jack moving around my living room, examining the photographs on the mantel and bookshelves, many of which featured him, from the days when he had been a constant in our lives. He paused before a particular frame, picking it up for closer examination. I recognized it even from a distance. A photo of Harold, Jack, and Daniel on a fishing trip when my son was about 7. They were standing waist-deep in a stream, all three grinning widely, fish held up, proudly for the camera. "I remember this day," Jack said when I joined him, coffee mugs in hand. "Clear Creek. Daniel caught his first rainbow trout." He was so excited he nearly fell in trying to show it off, I recalled, smiling at the memory. Jack replaced the photo, carefully. "Good days." "The best," I agreed, handing him his coffee. "Cream, no sugar, if your preference hasn't changed." It hasn't. He seemed pleased that I remembered. "Very little about me has changed, Eleanor, including how I feel about certain things." The implication in his words hung between us, neither acknowledged nor dismissed. Instead, we settled on the sofa, a comfortable distance between us, sipping our coffee and letting the events of the day gradually settle into perspective. "Do you think Daniel meant what he said?" I asked finally. "About talking tomorrow? About things being different?" Jack considered this carefully, in the thoughtful way I remembered from our years of friendship. "I think he wants to mean it," he said eventually. "Whether he can follow through will depend on a lot of factors, including how much influence the Harringtons continue to have, but Walter's intervention certainly changed the equation." "For now," I agreed. "But Walter is 93. His influence won't last forever. No, Jack acknowledged. But sometimes all we need is enough time and space to remember who we really are and what truly matters. Walter gave Daniel that opening. The rest will be up to him. As we continued talking, the conversation gradually shifted from the wedding to other topics. Jack's life in Cedar Ridge, my retirement activities, mutual acquaintances from the old days. The tension of the day slowly dissipated, replaced by the easy rhythm of two people with shared history finding their way back to comfortable connection. When Jack finally rose to leave, well past midnight, I walked him to the door with a curious reluctance. The day that had begun with such apprehension had transformed into something unexpected. Not just the confrontation and partial resolution with Daniel, but this reconnection with Jack, a friendship I had mourned for 15 years. "Thank you again for coming with me today," I said as we stood at the threshold. "I'm not sure I could have faced it alone." "You could have," Jack replied with that same certainty he'd expressed earlier. "But I'm glad you didn't have to." He hesitated, then added, "And I'm glad it was me who was there with you." Before I could respond, he leaned in and kissed my cheek, a brief, gentle contact that nonetheless left a lingering warmth. "I'll call you tomorrow," he promised. "Get some rest, Eleanor." I watched from the doorway as he walked to his car, his tall figure silhouetted against the moonlit street. Only when he had driven away did I close the door, leaning against it for a moment as I processed not just the events of the wedding, but the unexpected turn my life seemed to be taking. In my bedroom, I carefully hung up the blue dress and placed the pearl necklace back in its velvet pouch. The corsage Jack had given me, slightly wilted now but still beautiful, I set on my dresser, unwilling to discard it just yet. On the bedside table, I placed the small white box containing the preserved wedding cake, a symbol of inclusion that had been hard-won but perhaps all the more meaningful for the struggle. As I prepared for bed, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror, the same Eleanor Barnes who had awakened that morning dreading her son's wedding, but somehow changed by all that had transpired since. The hurt hadn't vanished, nor had the complex feelings about Daniel's choices and Vanessa's family. But alongside them now existed something else, a sense of having stood my ground, of having been seen and acknowledged despite attempts to render me invisible. And beyond that, a glimmer of possibility, not just for reconciliation with Daniel, but for a new chapter that might include Jack Emerson, returning to my life when I least expected, but perhaps most needed him. Morning arrived with soft September sunshine filtering through my bedroom curtains. For a few disorienting moments I lay still, the events of the previous day feeling almost dreamlike in their emotional intensity. Had Walter Harrington really interrupted his granddaughter's wedding reception to insist on a mother-son dance? Had Daniel actually apologized, promised to talk, invited me to stand with family for the farewell? It seemed both improbable and yet undeniably real. The bedside clock showed just past 7, early, but I felt surprisingly rested despite the late night. Years of nursing shifts had trained my body to function on irregular sleep, a habit that persisted into retirement. I rose, wrapping my robe around me, and made my way to the kitchen to start coffee. As the familiar aroma filled the cottage, I moved to the front porch with my first cup, settling into the swing that had witnessed so many mornings. The neighborhood was quiet, most of my neighbors still enjoying weekend sleep. My hydrangeas needed deadheading, I noticed absently. A task for later, perhaps. My phone chimed with a text message notification. Expecting Marietta checking in after the wedding, I was surprised to see Daniel's name on the screen. "Mom, just wanted to confirm we're still planning to talk today. Could I come by around 11? There's something important I need to discuss with you. Love, Daniel." The formal phrasing was so characteristic of my son these days, careful, measured, as if each word had been considered for potential implications. But the "love, Daniel" at the end felt like a small return to earlier times, before every communication became a strategic exercise. I texted back a simple affirmative and returned to my coffee, watching the early light strengthen across my garden. Daniel coming here rather than asking me to meet him somewhere neutral seemed significant, a willingness to step back into my world rather than insisting I accommodate his. By 10:30, I had showered and dressed in comfortable slacks and a light sweater, tidied the already neat cottage, and assembled a plate of lemon cookies I'd baked earlier in the week. The domestic preparations were perhaps unnecessary. Daniel had grown up in this house, had seen it in every state of order and disorder. But they gave my hands something to do while my mind processed expectations for the coming conversation. At precisely 5 minutes to 11, another text arrived, this one from Jack. Thinking of you today. Call if you need anything, or even if you don't. The message brought an involuntary smile to my face. Jack's return to my life felt simultaneously new and familiar, like rediscovering a favorite book I'd forgotten I owned. I typed a quick response, thanking him and promising to call later with an update. Daniel's silver BMW pulled into the driveway at 11 o'clock exactly. Through the front window, I watched him emerge, dressed casually in jeans and a button-down shirt rather than the designer suits he'd favored since joining Meridian Partners. He carried what appeared to be a large flat package under one arm. I opened the door before he could knock. Good morning, Daniel. Hi, Mom. He hesitated just slightly before stepping forward to kiss my cheek, a gesture that had once been automatic but now felt deliberately chosen. Thanks for seeing me. You never need thanks for visiting your mother, I replied, leading him into the living room. Coffee? Or there's iced tea in the fridge. Coffee would be great, thanks. While I prepared his cup, black with 1 sugar, unchanged since college. Daniel moved around the living room much as Jack had the night before, examining photographs and mementos. He paused before the fishing trip photo that had caught Jack's attention. I remember this day, he said when I returned with his coffee. Uncle Thunder taught me how to cast properly. Dad kept getting his line tangled in the trees. Uncle Thunder, I repeated, the old nickname catching me by surprise. You haven't called Jack that in years. Daniel accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. I saw him yesterday, at the wedding. His tone was careful, neutral. With you? Yes. I kept my own voice even, waiting to see where he would take the conversation. Daniel sat on the sofa, the package he'd brought leaning against his leg. Grandfather Walter had quite a lot to say about him. About both of you, actually. He paused, turning the coffee mug in his hands. After you left last night, he pulled me aside again. Told me the story of how he met his wife, Ida. This unexpected turn intrigued me. Oh? Apparently, Ida's family owned a small bakery in Walter's neighborhood. His parents, especially his mother, were horrified when he started courting her. Thought the Harringtons should only associate with certain kinds of people. Daniel's mouth twisted in a wry smile. Sound familiar? History does have a way of repeating itself, I observed, settling into my armchair across from him. He said, his mother tried everything to break them up, introduced him to suitable young women from their social circle, arranged for him to be sent to Europe for business training, even threatened to cut him off financially. Daniel looked up, meeting my eyes directly. But he married Ida anyway, said it was the best decision he ever made, both personally and professionally, because her practical intelligence and work ethic balanced his ambitious nature. I considered this revelation about Walter and Ida Harrington a love story that defied social expectations, hidden beneath decades of accumulated wealth and influence. No wonder Walter had been so quick to recognize and challenge the attempted erasure of my role in Daniel's life. He had lived through a similar struggle from the opposite perspective. Vanessa never mentioned any of this, I commented. According to Grandfather Walter, the family history has been sanitized over the years, especially by Corinne, who prefers the version where the Harringtons have always been blue blood aristocracy. Daniel set his coffee down. He showed me photographs last night. Ida in her baker's apron, their tiny first apartment. Said he keeps them in his study as a reminder of what matters. The parallels were striking, not just to our own family history, but to my current situation with Daniel. I wondered if Walter had chosen this particular family story deliberately, knowing its resonance. That's quite a legacy, I said. One worth remembering. Daniel nodded, seeming to gather himself for whatever had been the true purpose of his visit. Mom, I owe you more than the brief apology I managed yesterday. The way you were treated at the wedding, the way I allowed you to be treated, was inexcusable. Yes, I agreed simply. It was. He looked slightly startled at my direct response, perhaps having expected gentle maternal absolution. But I had decided during the night that true reconciliation would require honesty, not polite evasions. I got caught up in the Harrington world, he continued after a moment. The connections, the opportunities, the lifestyle. It happened so. Gradually, I barely noticed how much I was changing to fit their expectations. And then when it came to the wedding, he swallowed visibly. I convinced myself it was just one day, that the compromises were temporary and necessary. Compromises, I repeated. Is that what you call excluding your mother from family photos, seating her with strangers, canceling the mother-son dance? Daniel flinched. When you put it that way, it sounds terrible. Because it was terrible. Daniel, it was hurtful and humiliating. I kept my voice level despite the emotion behind my words. And it wasn't just the wedding. You've been pulling away for months, canceling visits, cutting phone calls short, making it clear that I don't quite fit into your new life. He didn't immediately defend himself or offer excuses, which I took as a positive sign. Instead, he seemed to be genuinely listening, accepting the impact of his choices. You're right, he said finally. And I'm truly sorry. Not just for yesterday, but for all of it. He reached for the package he'd brought, lifting it onto his lap. I brought something. It's not a fix. Nothing could instantly repair the hurt I've caused. But I hoped it might be a start. He handed me the flat rectangular package, wrapped in simple brown paper. This was supposed to be delivered to you this morning, but I asked if I could bring it personally instead. Curious despite myself, I unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was a framed photograph, professionally taken, beautifully printed, and elegantly framed. It showed Daniel and me during our dance at the reception, my blue dress vivid against his dark suit, both of our faces captured in a moment of genuine emotional connection. The photographer took it during our dance, Daniel explained. I had him rush the print this morning. He hesitated. It's also being included in the official wedding album. I've made that clear to Vanessa and her parents. Non-negotiable. Studied the photograph, unexpectedly moved by both the image itself and what it represented. Daniel's public acknowledgement of my importance, captured for posterity, despite the Harringtons' earlier attempts to minimize my presence. Thank you, I said softly. It's beautiful. There's something else, Daniel continued, his expression growing more serious. Something I need to tell you about Jack. My guard immediately rose. What about him? I owe him an apology too. A significant one. Daniel looked genuinely remorseful. The things I believed, the rumors I repeated, it was wrong, Mom. All of it. I knew it was wrong even as I was doing it, but it was easier to push him away than to stand up to Philip Harrington's insinuations. Jack was your father's best friend, I reminded him. Your godfather. He taught you to fish, to change a tire, to throw a proper pitch. He was there for every milestone after your father died. No, Daniel acknowledged. And I threw all that away because of gossip and social positioning. He met my gaze directly. Grandfather Walter said something that really hit home. He asked me if I'd rather be surrounded by people who value my connections, or by people who would stand by me if all those connections disappeared tomorrow. The wisdom in Walter's question resonated deeply. I had always tried to instill similar values in Daniel, but sometimes truth needs to come from an unexpected source to truly be heard. Jack is coming over for dinner tonight, I said, deciding transparency was the best approach. He and I have reconnected and we're exploring what that might mean. Daniel nodded, processing this information. I'm glad, he said after a moment, surprising me. He's a good man, always was. He hesitated, then added, would it be okay if I called him to apologize properly and maybe start rebuilding that relationship too? I think he'd like that, I replied, feeling a tentative hope begin to bloom. He never stopped caring about you, Daniel, even when it hurt. We talked for nearly 2 hours, covering ground both painful and healing. Daniel shared more about his experiences integrating into Vanessa's world, the subtle and not-so-subtle pressures to conform, the gradual separation from his roots that had led to yesterday's breaking point. I spoke honestly about my hurt and disappointment, but also about my enduring love and hope for reconciliation. When he finally prepared to leave, promising to join Jack and me for dinner later in the week, there was a lightness between us that had been absent for too long. Not everything was resolved. Such deep wounds would take time to fully heal, but we had made a beginning that felt genuine rather than perfunctory. At the door, Daniel embraced me properly, the kind of unrestrained hug I remembered from before Vanessa, before Meridian Partners, before he started measuring his worth against the Harrington standard. I love you, Mom, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry I forgot what matters. I love you too, I replied, holding him tightly for a moment before stepping back. Always have, always will, even when you break my heart. After he left, I placed the framed photograph on my mantel, adjusting it slightly so the light caught it properly. The image captured something essential, not just a mother-son dance at a wedding, but a moment of reconnection after a period of painful distance, a beginning rather than an ending. My phone chimed with a text from Jack. Still thinking about you. Dinner still on for tonight? I smiled, typing back a confirmation and adding, Daniel sends his regards, and an apology that's been a long time coming. The response came almost immediately. Good. The boy finally came to his senses. Looking forward to tonight. I'll bring dessert. I moved to the porch swing again, settling into its familiar embrace as I contemplated the unexpected turns my life had taken in just 24 hours. Yesterday morning, I had steeled myself to be the outsider at my only child's wedding, bracing for exclusion and disappointment. Now I sat with cautious hope for reconciliation with Daniel, a budding reconnection with Jack, and even an unexpected alliance with Walter Harrington. The hydrangeas nodded in the gentle breeze, their blue heads beginning to show the purple tinge of late season. I really should deadhead them, I thought again, but not today. Today was for appreciating their beauty exactly as they were, imperfect, transitioning, but still very much alive and thriving. Like me. I closed my eyes, tilting my face to the sun. The porch swing creaked gently, its rhythm as familiar as my own heartbeat. In a few hours, Jack would arrive for dinner, bringing with him possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to consider in years. Next weekend, Daniel and I would continue the conversation we'd begun today, building a bridge back to authentic connection. And next month, surprisingly, I would join a family dinner at Walter Harrington's home, taking my rightful place in my son's life, regardless of Corinne's preferences. The future stretched before me, not the lonely, marginalized existence I had feared yesterday morning, but something richer and more promising. A life where being excluded from wedding photos had ultimately led to being truly seen, perhaps for the first time in years. I smiled, opening my eyes to the beauty of my modest garden, my quiet street, my imperfect but precious life. Sometimes the paths we most dread lead us exactly where we need to go. If only we have the courage to walk them with our heads held high. And sometimes, when they see who walks beside us, whether a distinguished patriarch, a loyal friend, or simply our own unwavering dignity, they stop the ceremony, change the narrative, and make space for truth to emerge. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these. Up! Just click and check them out!